Hi, I'm Hannah and welcome to 500 Breads. In this video, I'll be walking you through what I call my sourdough-ish bread. I'll show you how you can use your sourdough starter discard plus instant yeast to make a really delicious loaf that can be ready in just 2.5 hours, with most of that being rise time. Now, I love sourdough bread. I've been baking it for many years and it's something that I just love to have on the go on a day where I'm going to be puttering around at home. But to be honest, some days I just don't have enough time to make it. I wanted to figure out a way to make a loaf that still had a really nice sourdough flavor, but just didn't take as much time. Let's start with a quick overview of sourdough starter discard. Every time you feed your sourdough starter, you get rid of half of it, and then you replace that with equal parts flour and water. So the discard that I'm using today is the half of the sourdough starter that would have just gotten tossed when I fed it. Because we're not doing the long fermentation of a traditional sourdough bread recipe, it means that our loaf is going to need some help rising. So in addition to the sourdough starter discard, we're also going to add some instant yeast. For this recipe, you'll need 2 cups of warm water, 2¼ teaspoons of instant yeast, 1/3 cup of sourdough starter discard, that's the starter you would get rid of each time you feed your starter, 1½ teaspoons of salt, 4½ cups of all-purpose or bread flour. We'll start by adding our 2¼ teaspoons of instant yeast to the 2 cups of warm water, stir, and let it stand for 5 minutes until it gets foamy on the surface. Then I'll add 1/3 cup of my sourdough starter discard to this mixture, and I'll use my clean hands to break it up. In a larger bowl, I'm adding 4½ cups of the flour and 1½ teaspoons of salt and giving it a quick whisk to combine. Now I'll add the wet ingredients to my dry ingredients, mix until a shaggy dough forms. And then we're gonna roll it out onto a lightly floured surface. We'll knead this dough for 5 minutes. You will find that it's going to be quite sticky at first. If you find it's just unmanageable for you, just add additional flour a tablespoon at a time. I also find sometimes that I get sticky bits on my hand and then that just makes it really hard to handle the dough. So sometimes I just pause the kneading, wash my hands, dry them, and then reflour my hands and start again. All right, the surface of this dough is nice and smooth. When I poke a finger into it, the imprint that I make bounces back. So now we know that this is ready to rise. I've cleaned out the larger bowl I mixed the dough in, lightly oiled it, and I'm gonna put the dough ball in and cover it with a dish towel. All right, so I've got my dough here. I'm gonna let it rise for 1.5 hours. I'm gonna put it in my oven using the bread-proof setting. If you don't have an oven with this setting, just try to find somewhere warm in your house to put it. In other places that I've lived in, I found that just turning the clothes dryer on for 5 or 10 minutes, turning it off, and then popping the dough in there works really well. Overall, the concept is that the warmer the environment, the faster the dough is going to rise. The colder the environment, the slower it's going to rise. But a good rule of thumb when you're eyeballing your rising dough is that for a bread like this, you want it to have doubled in size by the time it's ready. Ta-da! All done rising. At this point, you'll want to preheat your oven and stick a Dutch oven inside to warm up. If you don't have a Dutch oven, you can still make this on a cast iron pan or on a cookie sheet. You just want to have the steam effect of the Dutch oven, so your bread will not be quite as crispy and maybe not as golden brown, but it'll still be really delicious. Now I'm going to flour this work surface again and roll out the dough to shape. Now I'm going to score the top of the loaf, and what this does is it creates a vent where steam can escape, which really helps with oven spring. Whenever I bake bread in a Dutch oven, I carefully run the tap over the inside of the preheated lid, and then I quickly place it over the bread to trap that steam inside. Now we're going to bake the loaf for 20 minutes. When my timer goes off at the 20-minute mark, I take the Dutch oven out, take the lid off, marvel at how great the bread looks, and then I put it back and bake for 10 more minutes or so And I usually just eyeball when the crust gets a nice deep golden brown. What a beautiful loaf! I'm really happy with this. I'm gonna put it on a cooling rack and fight the urge to cut into it for about 30 minutes. Thank you so much for following along as I made this sourdough-ish bread with sourdough starter discard and instant yeast. If you enjoyed this video and you'd like to follow along as I bake the next 492 breads, subscribe.